Hi. I say welcome to everyone. We're glad you're here today. If you've got your cell phone on, would you please turn it off so that it doesn't interfere with our Zoom people. We want to welcome Jeffrey Wells as our guest speaker today. Phil tells me that by the time he's finished speaking, you will have seen the angels of God ascending and descending in the heavenly staircase. So we wait with bated breath.
Here's
No pressure. For a centering thought, I frequently turn to the closest thing that Quakers have to a traveling evangelist, Carrie Newcomer, and she has a poem called Because There's Not Enough Time. I used to think that because life is short, I should do more, be more, squeeze more into each and every day. I'd walk around with a stick ruler with increasing numbers as the measure of fullness. But lately I've sensed a different response to the lack of time felt in my bones. The singular worth of each passing moment. Perhaps the goal is not to spend this day power skiing atop an ocean of multitasking. Maybe the idea is to swim slower, surer, dive deeper, and really look around. There's a difference between a life of width and a life of depth. The first hymn is number 7 in Worship and Song, Come Thou Almighty King. Just stand if you're able, please. Come Thou Almighty King, 7, Worship and Song. Time for announcements. We go with the Zoom people first, as per custom. Zoom people, announcements. Everybody else here in the room, announcements? Whatever it is.
Good morning, everyone. Anne is not here today, and so she tasked me with reminding everyone that there are still some things that need to be signed up for the Books and Brunch next Saturday. I was going to bring the sheets in, and then I forgot I was counting people. But on those sheets out there, I did want to make a clarification that everything where there's a line needs to be filled in. So we need everything where there's a line. So except I don't think, and I'm not real clear on this one, about all the people helping. There seems like a lot of lines for people helping, so I don't know about that one. But all the other stuff, all the baked and canned stuff, if there's an empty line, we need it. So if everybody could please take a look at that again before you leave, would be much appreciated. Thank you.
I'd just like to remind everyone that next Sunday, October 16th, will be the October monthly meeting for business at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Also, I'd like to ask if any of you are willing and able, if you could stay after meeting for a few minutes and help us move the furniture out of the gathering area so we can begin to set up for the book and jewelry sale for next week. We would appreciate any help. Thank you.
Any other announcement? Okay, with regard to offering, you know the drill. There's plates in the back. We have ways to online to contribute. Also, there are baskets in the back for. Well, let us pray. We remember the circle of people who surround us, our dear ones. These people gathered here in person and by Zoom and in spirit. We remember the wider circle of people who live near us, share our needs and concerns. Those we know, those we wave to with a smile. We remember the much wider circle of people related to us because they draw breath and share this planet. We remember this planet and every creature of whom we must remember we are a part. We remember all who have trouble, whose heart is broken, who raise up their eyes and look to you. O God, sustain life, increase love, frustrate hate, help the suffering. Let us feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and shelter the homeless. Hear our prayer, open our hearts. Amen.
Good morning. I was so thankful to get the call to come here. Phil and I have have a new relationship. We've become friends within the past few years through Western Yearly Meeting. Myra and I actually live not too far from the farm that Phil talks about where Joanne grew up. So when I got the call the other day, I'm thinking to myself, oh wow, I'm going to Canby. I'm going to that little town that's just south and east of that town that appears underneath the staple in the middle of the map. I'm filling in for Phil Gulley. Y'all know Phil. So I sent Phil a message, and I told Phil, I said, Phil, I got the call. I'm coming to fill in for you. I really wanted to ask Phil if they canned you. Are you done? Are you finished there? Have they just finally gotten rid of you? But I didn't do that because I didn't think that to be the case. So I just told Phil that I'll behave. And in typical Phil Gulley response, which came almost immediately, I get the, well, heck, if you behave, that'll take all the fun out of it. So I have a promise to Phil, and I have a promise to my wife, Myra, that I will behave today. I'm just a country boy from Kentucky. I've been in Indiana for 20 years now. Grew up on a tobacco farm, fifth generation tobacco farmers in north central Kentucky. Married Myra 20 years ago and had become a Hoosier, although I still don't know what a Hoosier is. I've been in ministry for 26 years now. I got the offer to speak in 1996 at a small Baptist church in Eminence, Kentucky, from a pastor who had been there 40 years and trusted that I could fill the pulpit for him one Sunday. And I've never looked back. But I became a recorded minister in the Friends Church 7 years ago. And that's made all the difference in the world. My ministry is now molded and shaped by experience, not by my knowledge of a particular scripture or a writing, but what I see and what I hear in the people that I encounter, in the stories and the memories that I have. So it's taken on a different type of ministry. Spent quite a bit of time in Africa the past 14 years, where storytelling is the only way to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to an illiterate community and people who have never heard of Jesus or the inner light. So my ministry now is mostly about storytelling and experience. And I'm here today to tell you that has matured into who I am today. And it focuses on the human condition. So I hope that our time together this morning is both encouraging and meaningful for you. And I hope that this gathering of friends feels and experiences the presence of that of God in my stories and in each other as we bear witness, the witness of our lives and our stories. So I want to start this morning by painting a picture in your mind. According to the Bible, David sang the following words to the Lord when the Lord had saved him from Saul and all of his enemies. In Psalm 18, David sings these words, "For it is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lightens my darkness." I want us to absorb that for a moment. Let's center ourselves on this light of Christ that is within us. Let's center ourselves on this song, on these words that David sang. "For it is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lightens my darkness." Begin to paint a picture in your minds. This morning I share with you about the deceptive nature of darkness and the burdens associated with being in the darkness. The object of many of my stories these days are my mother-in-law, Myra's mom, Jean. I love Jean. I stand before you as a son-in-law that says I love my mother-in-law more than just about anybody on earth. She is kind, she is sweet, and she talks a lot. Myra's dad had passed before we met 20 years ago, and Jean had a companion, Butch and Jean. Isn't that a great duo? Butch and Jean. Butch passed last summer from a battle with cancer. We lost a dear friend in our family. And Jean lost a companion, but Jean had accumulated over the past 20 years all these stories of her and Butch's adventures. One evening, her and Butch were driving in the darkness. Butch liked to get out and just drive and ride around, so it had become dark. And Butch, in his characteristic voice, says, "Hey, look at that moon, honey." And Jean says, "I don't see no moon." They drive on. "Boy, isn't that a beautiful moon, honey?" Jean had now leaned forward and was pressing her face on the windshield and said, "I don't see no moon, Butch." And again, Butch says, "See that moon? That's the most beautiful moon I've ever seen." And Jean says, "I don't see no moon, Butch." And he repeated it again. "What about that moon, honey?" And she goes, "Are you talking about that moon?" Butch said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, you crazy old fool, that's a Shell station sign." Butch had seen something in the darkness that appeared to him to be the moon. Sometimes we are deceived in what we see in the darkness. So this leads me this morning to my own personal experience with darkness. It was but just a moment in my life, but my moments in darkness were intense, and they were particularly burdensome. First of all, you have to know me. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm not afraid to admit it. I've been afraid of the dark since I was a kid. I don't like being in the dark. Just ask Myra about the night I took the dog out for a walk, and I walked under a pine tree, and the pine tree brushed me on the back of the head, and I let out a scream that you could hear all throughout Salem, because I had been attacked by a pine tree in the dark. I don't like the dark, never liked it, never will. But nonetheless, in 1994, I found myself living in a very dark and heavy place. Earlier in that summer, my marriage had collapsed, and it would never be repaired. My boys, David and Michael, were 6 and 3, and my divorce the following year would be the very first divorce on either side of my family's history. I hold the record. Number 1. I was broken, living in the dark, and the burden was heavy. And the people that cared for me the most, my parents, my children, my friends, they were hurt the most. But the darkness of my life would soon become overshadowed by an event that occurred later in the summer of 1994. On an evening in late August, on a day much like today, I received a call that my niece, Danny, my brother's child, had fallen gravely ill She was 3. The family had been called to Children's Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. Her condition was so grave that her pediatrician in Shelbyville, about a 20 to 30 minute drive to Louisville, rode in the ambulance with her just to keep her alive. This time, the darkness was not deceptive, it was real. The fragility of this young child's life was very real, and we were losing her that evening. I was about an hour away from Louisville. And because of the condition of my life at the time, I had no one to be with me and comfort me as I made the trip down Interstate 71. Now, The Lion King came out that year. The movie, the children's cartoon movie, The Lion King. It was raining a bit that evening, and the windshield wipers were swapping off the rain, and Can You Feel the Love Tonight came on the radio. I was crying. I was driving in the dark with the windshield wipers on, crying. I don't like the dark. I don't like being alone. And I cried and cried as I heard the words, "There's a calm surrender to the rush of day." Those words would fill my mind for the remainder of this evening as we waited in the ER, in the waiting room. Now, many of you that have been in an emergency room, waiting room, know that they're not a fun place. They themselves are a very dark place, not too cheerful, especially when you're in a children's hospital. So dark and dreary was this place that you could almost hear and feel the unspoken prayers of those families that had gathered around you in their pain and in their agony. It's a conflicting place, being in the darkness and being in the ER. You feel both the deception and the burden of darkness. The time between updates appeared to be an eternity. Not just from our family, but for the families that were around us as well. I stayed off to myself most of the evening. The condition of my marriage and my life really didn't give people a desire to want to be around me. So I stayed in my own personal darkness. But what I began to do in my own personal darkness was to observe the darkness and pain of others. My parents, my brother, the families that had gathered there in the emergency room. As time passed that evening, I began to realize that there's a difference between self-imposed darkness, that deceptive darkness that one creates in their own lives, and the kind of darkness that one experiences when a young and innocent life is being snatched away from your brother's arms. There didn't seem to be a calm surrender that night in the ER.
The last hymn is Have Thine Own Way, Lord, in worship and song 161. 161, Have Thine Own Way, Lord, worship and song. If you're able to stand, shall we please?
You can be seated for a moment. Every story has an ending. My story today has both an ending and a beginning. I love the fact that we sang Have Thine Own Way. I grew up with that hymn in a small Christian church in Bethlehem, Kentucky, which has 6 members, 2 of them being my mom and dad. The Lord had his own way in 1994. I've often heard it said, I have a scientific mind. I've been a pharmacist for 36 years, so I have a scientific mind. I've heard it been said that there is no such thing as darkness. That darkness is nothing more than the absence of light. Our light as a family came the next morning when the doctor came out and told us that Danny was going to live. She'd been diagnosed with leukemia, picked up by a chigger bite, is what put her in the doctor's office earlier that morning. Or not picked up, detected. She went to the doctor because of a chigger bite. We attribute Danny's living through the night to very knowledgeable and dedicated medical professionals at Children's Hospital. Doctors, nurses, laboratory technologists, pharmacists. Their God-given talent and care illuminated our darkness, saved our loved one. There are many that would attribute this to prayer. Like all of the unspoken prayers that I could sense in the silence and darkness of the ER. There may be truth to that. I don't know. I think that's beyond me to understand fully and to know. Not all of the others' loved ones lived that night. Ours did. In my personal calm surrender that evening, that rush of relief of good news, I experienced something different. For the first time in my being blinded by darkness, in the darkness of life, I experienced the goodness and the inner light of others. In their grief and in their pain, in their talents and in their knowledge, in their solitude and in their togetherness. I experienced that of Christ that evening in others and in myself. Danny is alive and well today. Several months of chemotherapy. Now, 28 years later, she's married and is a healthy 31-year-old woman, wife of Marcus. My personal ascent out of darkness and the burdens that darkness carries was gradual and has been gradual for the past 28 years. In 2001, I found myself on an online dating service, trying to find someone in life. We hid that fact from the children for a long time. It's not good to be online and to meet people online. But I found myself on an online dating service. When I filled out my biography, I stated that I was a Christian man looking for a new start with a Christian woman. At the same time, there was this lady in Indiana who had written she was a Christian woman looking for a new start with a Christian man. We've been married for 20 years now. But that's not the end of the story. You see, that night in the hospital, and all the medical, knowledgeable and medical professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists. There was a young laboratory technologist on duty that evening who looked into a microscope and saw my niece's damaged cells and took it to a pathologist who determined it to be leukemia, saving my niece's life. I didn't know her then, but Myra Spurgeon, my wife, was that young lady that was on duty that night, that looked deep at the cellular level of my family and had the light in her, the knowledge to help diagnose this young lady who is still alive today. And 7 years later, who had the knowledge and the love and the caring light of Christ within her to become my wife and my companion, who brought me out of my personal darkness. I encourage you today to look at those around you. to see that of God within them. To put aside all the garbage that we hear on the radio and on TV and the stuff that's going on in our world that's removing our sight, that is taking us away from seeing that of God, that of Christ in others. I challenge you as you leave this place today that you open your eyes, you see the world in a whole new way. You experience, you feel, you are drawn to that light that is Christ, that is in others. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm so happy that I get to experience what Phil says is the company of good friends. And now seeing it from his vantage point, I know what he's talking about. Stand and greet our neighbors.
I don't know about that. You heard it.